blacks have a history in Alabama going all the way back to the era of slavery through the Civil War, emancipation, the Reconstruction era, resurgence of white supremacy with the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow laws, the Civil Rights Movement, and then the recent decades. I bet you didn't know that before Africans were used as slaves in Alabama, the Creek Indian Nation was exploited the same way blacks from Alabama were enslaved. But what happened was that industrial scale plantation slavery overtook the old system, the old way of producing. Black slave labor, African slave labor became the way of the South. Without African slaves, southern states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, who generated their wealth by growing cotton, sugar, rice, and tobacco, they couldn't have survived. White plantation owners got filthy rich off the backs of our African ancestors. Even my own family, they were slaves. They served as slaves right down the road, just a few miles south from where I am, down at a place called Oak Bowery. Field hands were slaves who labored in the plantation fields. They would plant, tend, and harvest cotton, sugar, rice, and the tobacco. Now, most of the slaves coming into Alabama, they actually came here from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now I want to tell you a story about the last known slaves brought to Alabama. The last known slaves brought to Alabama included 110 African children, teenagers, and young adults on board a ship called the Clotilda. It arrived in the Mobile Bay in 1860, and that was just a year before the Civil War. Now, do you realize that was just a mere 162 years ago? Even though slavery was still legal in 1860, the international slave trade was not legal, and it hadn't been since 1808. Now, that was 52 years. But here's the deal. Southern white men broke the law by importing captured Africans after the practice was banned, and even viewed their evasion of the law as a badge of pride. That was a badge of honor. A Mobile businessman named Timothy Meagher, that's Meagher, Meaher, organized the Clotilda voyage after making a bet that he could, as he put it, bring a ship full of niggers right into Mobile Bay under the officers' noses. Now, what do you think of that? So he planned to sell these slaves, and he did sell some of them, but he ended up dividing most of them between himself, his two brothers, and the ship's captain. Now, what I find most fascinating about that is, would you believe not a one of those outlaws was ever convicted for their crime? And the reason why I tell you that story is because for most of the decades after that, the real true stories of blacks in Alabama have been hidden from view. And even today, in 2022, we remain powerless because those who did have power in the state of Alabama have continued to break the law, or at least manipulate it, to obscure the truth and to hide the real history of our people. And all of that was in order to dumb us down and limit our advancement, keep us illiterate, and blindfold us to the truth of our journey as a people. And I'm going to try to tell you how that has been maintained. You just think about it for a minute. As big and power-packed with information as the modern day internet is, you can't find a lot of information about our history in Alabama. It has been intentionally hidden from us. Don't you know that's by design? Don't you know that that's how it was set up? Don't you know that when Alabama was being formed as a state and the first constitution was written or drawn up, the convention opened up with the declaration that the sole purpose in drafting its first constitution was to maintain white supremacy. Oh God, and all the years since the state was formed, that has been at the top of the political agenda and those in power in the state of Alabama. Just look at some numbers. I just want to share some numbers with you. In 2010, only 15% of white Alabamians, that translates to 487,100 people, were in poverty, while 37% of black Alabamians were in poverty. And that translates to 457,900. Now, what is that saying to us? Well, what it says is that the number of blacks in Alabama who live in poverty is way out of proportion when you compare that to the number of whites. Statewide, the white citizens far outnumber blacks. That's in general population. So the numbers don't lie. That should tell us something is terribly wrong when there are nearly as many blacks living in poverty in the state of Alabama as whites. The number should be way lower, simply because the number of black citizens statewide is lower. In 2013, the median household income in Alabama was $42,849. The average white household income was $49,465, while the black household income was $29,210. Look at the disparity. And then let's also look at the whole nation now. The entire country. The national median household income was $52,250. The average white household income was $55,867, while the black household income was $34,815. What a wide gap, y'all. I'm switching gears now because I want to talk about John Merrill. Now, John Merrill is the Alabama Secretary of State, and basically he's in charge of all the voting for the state and so forth and so on. You can go to the Secretary of State website and you can read all about him. John Merrill actually comes from one of the most racist areas in the state of Alabama. He's right down below us. Well, I should say right above us in Cleveland County. It's where he comes from. He made the announcement that 94% of all eligible Alabamians and 96% of all eligible black people in Alabama were registered to vote. But guess what? His numbers don't jive with the United States Bureau of the Census, which states that only 69% of all eligible Alabamians and 67.4% of all black people in Alabama were registered to vote. Now, who's telling the truth and who's telling a lie? That's the question. Now I want to switch gears again because I want to talk about Alabama's prison. According to Politico, Alabama sends so many people to prison that the state can no longer safely house its inmates. Consequences of a tough-on-crime mentality among politicians and the public that keeps aggressive sentencing laws on the book. Don't you know that's by design? And don't you know that's the reason why more African American men are represented in the state's prison population than any other ethnic group? Now, I just want to point out why, some of the reasons why blacks in Alabama are so powerless. And you just see, just look at these and see if you can see yourself in any of these statistics. First of all, the history of cruelty and violence against blacks, the long-standing history of poverty, income inequality, lack of access to capital, lack of home ownership, the widening wealth gap, illiteracy, voter disenfranchisement, overrepresentation in the state's prisons, mass incarceration of black men, the death penalty, white supremacy, unequal access to health care, racial gerrymandering, ex-felon disenfranchisement, environmental injustice. Sisters and brothers, we have got to take lessons from our sisters and brothers in Georgia. Stand up, speak up, stop being a slave, start being free. All of these issues keep black Alabamians powerless. But it's time to take your power back. How? By speaking up. Every time an election is held in Alabama, this is your opportunity to speak out about things you don't like about Alabama. You have to do it. You have to do it. How? Vote. Here's what I know for sure. Every last one of them is going to die and rot in hell, toting the Bible and hiding behind their hypocritical profession of faith and declaration that they're such model Christians. But in the meantime, we must vote. God bless you. God bless and keep each and every one of you is my prayer.